hello, welcome to Albumpressions. If you've forgotten, this is the previously monthly, now whatever I'm ready series where I give my early thoughts and impressions on albums I've heard recently, mostly new releases, but also some older stuff too. And I've got a lot to cover, given how overdue this episode is, plus I've decided to tack on some albums from my last sub-special that I wanted to check out as well, so strap in. It's gonna be a bit of a ride. This is Albumpressions. Gay, that is all. Well, okay, not quite. I'd been looking for a really good synth-pop album for pretty much all of 2022 and never quite found it until like the 11th hour when I finally got around to checking out this one, and lo and behold, the album everyone said was really good was really good. I think it was around Runner's High that I realized it, because what a cool track, but the album continues to surprise across its tight runtime and the bops never stop pouring in either. Pair that with its overtly queer post-breakup recovery arc painted with optimism and hope for the future, and it's just delightful on all fronts. I feel like this one's been talked to death by now, post-list season, but there's good reason for that, and I really cannot recommend it highly enough. New year, same endless onslaught of black metal albums. This one's right at my alley though. Big, spacey vibes, crushing atmosphere, fuzzed out guitar tones. It's got a cool structure too, where the first half is a bit more meditative, the ambient middle track bridges the gap, and the second half is a lot more frantic, almost thrashy at times. And that kind of pairs well with its lyrics, which are, well, not explicitly about finding yourself and then having to suppress who you really are for your own safety. Through the metaphor of traveling to space and meeting otherworldly creatures that opens your mind to the vastness of the universe before coming back down to Earth again, but it's definitely at least implied. My only real gripe is that it does run a bit short, just over half an hour, and with the cosmic concept and grand sound, I would have loved to see it fleshed out more, but even what we got is still pretty damn cool. Band whose name I won't say has successfully released the first album of 2023 that makes me go, oh hell yeah, because this is absolutely my jam. Very melodic and surprisingly fun, post-hardcore and art punk? Yeah, sure, where the songs are just as likely to be classy and groovy as they are balls to the walls unhinged, with plenty of tracks in between. And with how good the guitars themselves sound, it makes for such a colorful and varied listen. Even as lead vocalist Damien Abraham roughly screams over most of the album's runtime. It's a pairing of the pretty and the ugly that works really well, which also extends to the lyrics, or at least what I can find. Between anger at Canada's attempts to cover up its genocidal origins to a eulogy for a fallen friend, alongside struggles with anxiety and purpose. I'm sure there's more in the songs I don't have lyrics for too. There's a broad scope in both sound and content, and I'm all here for it. I'm only mad I didn't discover these guys sooner, really.
Last night really was the cherry on the cake. Been some dark days lately and I'm finding it crippling.
RAYE is pretty definitively the first big story of 2023, and given her history of major labels, she's one of the easiest artists working today to root for. Helps that the music itself is pretty cool too. Broad palettes of pop, rap, and R&B across 13 proper tracks, often with sounds and colors that aren't exactly mainstream, but not too far off the beaten path so as to be inaccessible. I particularly dig the harsher bass tones on Escapism and the grooves on tracks like The Thrill Is Gone and Worth It, but I genuinely like most of what's here, yeah. The content is, starting with songs detailing a post-breakup depressive spiral into substance abuse for the first half. Maybe a bit too many, to where they don't all stand out, but then there's RAYE tackling sexual assault head-on in Ice Cream Man, or body dysmorphia on, well, body dysmorphia, though the doomerism on environmental anxiety doesn't quite sit right with me. It's a bit scattered in places, I guess. It feels like an album of two halves, though I do like the positive note it ends on. Maybe not blowing me away, but it's a good debut. Yeah, I guess my taste has been too good lately. Sure, why not just throw on some absolutely unhinged metalcore? Like, this is 30 straight minutes of raw aggression, which is usually something I can't stand. So me sitting here telling you that, no, this is awesome actually, means they're doing something right. For one, that guitar tone is just delicious. Crunchy and thick, you can practically hear the amp crackling, and thank God for that, because that hits so much harder than featureless gen tones or overly down-tuned chugging. And the tunes actually have, like, tunes. Discordant and dissonant ones, sure, but recognizable ones. The grooves are also rock solid, and the album is just plain funny with how ridiculous it gets in spots. My only real gripe is that the longer tracks towards the middle do feel a bit too long. Only spots where this got tedious for me, really. It's definitely a very particular album for a very particular audience, but it's just so stupid it's hard not to love it. Yup, it's that time of year again. Pony time, baby. What Vylet offers us here is, well, the album starts off finding common ground between the VGM styles of fairy tales, the hyperpop of Cutie Marks, and the soundscapes of Fish Whisperer, though it's way more of the first than the other two. Then it takes a turn, with harsher electronics bleeding into the album until it turns onto a full-on metal album for a handful of tracks. And there's a darker tone from that point forward, mixed in elements of swing revival, new jack swing, breakbeats, trip hop. Wow, this is a very 90s album, isn't it? And lyrically, it strikes me as being about, well, how having a spot like that you can cast a longer shadow. A Persona 4 style shadow, in fact. All of Vylet's insecurities and anxieties personified, where she's trying to learn to accept that darker side of herself. Though I'm not quite sure any resolution is reached by the end. It feels like it means more to her than it's gonna mean to me, but it's still interesting, and Carousel left a stronger first impression than Fish Whisperer did for me, so yeah, I dig it. Born from a collaboration of members from two bands whose names I refuse to try and pronounce, Omega Infinity is a black metal project trying to capture the enormity of space. Last time it was planetary in scope, this time it's not only universal but from the beginning of time to the end, where structure erupts from the primordial chaos but the intensity never really lets up. And there's not much tunefulness to be found amongst the pounding drums and crushing guitars, mixed in with ritualistic and industrial elements by way of the life the cosmos spawned and then snuffed out, until everything returns back to a primordial quietness as all matter disintegrates into nothingness, or something like that. I'm making a lot of suppositions due to lack of any real lyric sheet, but I feel like the intent comes through crystal clear. And while it's not the best sounding or most dynamic black metal album I've ever heard, it's fascinating all the same. If you can handle the relentless extremity of it, this is some black metal definitely worth checking out. I feel like with a band name like Witch Rippery, you're getting exactly what you expect here. Except not quite. Like, yes, this is absolutely a stoner metal band. Or sludge metal, kinda both, really. Anyways, the point is that it's also very progressive, with emphasis on big, sweeping compositions and a grander scope than your typical stoner sludge act. It's kinda like if Baroness wrote longer, more involved songs, basically. I just love the way it sounds, mostly. Rip-roaring guitar riffs paired with soulful, soaring leads, primal and propulsive drumming, and even moments of delicate atmosphere all thrown into the mix. It comes down mostly to the riffs and solos, of course, as most any good stoner band tends to, but it's a compelling listen start to finish. One that both starts and ends really strong, even. And any fan of progressive metal would be doing themselves a disservice by not checking this one out. Maybe not the most essential or unique album, just really damn solid, you know? And speaking of inessential but still pretty damn solid albums, more prog metal. Lunar seems to be more like a project than a proper band, bringing in tons of guests from all across the modern prog metal scene across an hour-long, very dense, very technical, and fast-paced record. There's even some death metal elements here, though it's more like 2000s prog metal than anything else. You got some cool riffs, you got some chaotic, note-dense leads, some rip-roaring solos, actually pretty solid hook writing, and some calmer, more atmospheric moments. It's the whole colorful package, and maybe that's why I like it so much. And the concept seems to be, well, an illusionist, unhappy with his lot in life, and maybe possibly grappling with suicidal thoughts. That seems to be how the album ends anyways. It's hard to tell if I had a lyric sheet, but it's a bit darker than I'd usually expect. I don't know, call me nostalgic, but this just sounds better to my ears than, say, stuff like the new Haken, and I will not be covering on this channel, much to my dismay. It's at least damn good prog metal that keeps me interested, so yeah. You know, I've been weirdly vibing with these shorter slices of metalcore aggression this year, haven't I? This isn't as chaotic as Eyes was, or as weird, but it's still plenty violent and aggressive, the kind of bangers I can absolutely rock out to. Helps that it just sounds excellent. I cannot get enough of the guitar tone here, just the perfect level of breath and crunch to the riffs. Which, speaking of, yeah, this is just the kind of brutal heaviness that actually works for me, where it's not just chugging riffs, but the chugs actually have groove to them whenever they do show up, and it's unhinged and unstable with all sorts of ideas slamming into each other, paying no mind to song structure or cohesion. I can't see it wearing out its welcome on me since it isn't that diverse or that special, but it's a great little half hour of anger for me to vent my frustrations to, and I'm all here for it. For as cool as this album is, I struggle to really have much to say about it. Like, it's a riffs album, which is strange for an atmospheric black metal album, which this vaguely is, but it's definitely true. It's all about those angular, dissonant riffs and that juicy guitar tone. It's not completely one note, but it's definitely going out of its way to be impenetrable, but the end result is an album that, like, feels like the black metal version of one of my favorite albums, Plague Ship by L Drugstore. And despite how hard it is to really get a grasp on the shape of these songs, I find it more than compelling front to back, so it's definitely doing something right. I don't know, like I said, this is a bit of an anomaly, and maybe in a month I realize this isn't actually very good, but for right now, I'm just having the time of my life rocking along to it. When approaching a Liturgy album, you both know exactly what to expect and yet have no clue what to expect. Ravenna Hunt Hendricks has carved out her own little niche in the black metal scene, mixing the intensity and brutality of the genre with classical scope and composition alongside a heavy helping of glitchy, stuttering electronics. Though, in this case, I feel like the latter is a lot more downplayed here, and 93696 feels like the most stable Liturgy album to date. This does occasionally come at the cost of some of the chaos and violence inherent in their sound, but on the flip side, it's probably the most coherent and cohesive Liturgy's ever sounded, even if the excessive runtime and absolute glut of instrumental interlude tracks can make it feel more than a little drawn out. I also don't exactly have time to get into the whole Liturgy manifesto and lyrical arc of the album here, but even beyond the abstractness of the language, there's a sense of something spiritual to their sound that comes through loud and clear. I'm definitely gonna need more time to sit with this one, but it's already pretty damn compelling even after just a few listens, so... While always left-wing and anti-fascist in spirit, Spectral Lore's 11 Days is probably the most directly political any of Alos's projects have been to date. A protest against the European Union's policies towards migrant and refugees, especially his home country of Greece, and the unnecessary loss of life they've led to, told through a fictionalized version of a real-life event where a group of migrants survive sea travel for 11 days balanced on a ship's rudder. It's a bleak portrait of the desperation of tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of migrants, and on that level alone, is far more important than your average album. But I mean, it's Spectral Lore we're talking about here, so it's also just really damn good. The black metal style is fairly similar to their last outing in its dissonant, dense atmosphere, though this feels a bit less experimental and thus more accessible. But the real revelation is the two ambient tracks, much more developed and multifaceted than anything I've heard from Spectral Lore before, and I kinda want an entire album of this sound now. It's all really good stuff, and definitely worth your time and money for the cause of supporting, too. Oh hey, speaking of the band whose name I'm not gonna try and pronounce, yeah, they put out a new one too. The first in over 5 years. And look, if you know these guys, you know what to expect. Progressive death and black metal with violin. That's their hook, that's their sound, and they're sticking to it. But like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know? It's not a particularly adventurous outing for them. The most that stands out to me is that, unless I'm just like really numb to extreme metal now, this feels a lot less heavy than their previous albums, with more melodic riffs and more clean singing, though I'm not complaining when the riffs and atmosphere are still this strong, and the guitar and violin leads are as killer as ever. It also feels a bit less cohesive than their past few, more like a collection of songs rather than a long flowing work like Citadel and Urnfelt, though that may lead the songs to stand out more, so, you know, sure. If you don't know these guys, definitely worth checking out, but still pretty damn good even if you're used to their sound. Closing off the new releases section with, well, this is somewhere between Skrill and math rock, I guess? It's hard to pin down exactly what it sounds like to me. Twinkly guitars paired with chaotic riffs and clean nasally vocals. I kinda wanna say it's like if Swancore was, better, but even that feels reductive. What I will say is that even if I feel like there's a bit of a lack of hooks for how melodic this album is, it's also pretty consistently compelling start to finish. And even without a lyric sheet, I can tell a feeling of grief and loss runs throughout. Living without, that's what it feels like, alright. I also feel the guitar tones might lack a little weight. The sound feels smaller to me than it should, but it's colorful enough that it kinda compensates for that one weakness. Don't really have a ton else to say other than that it's cool, yeah, worth at least a spin or two. You wanna live like common people, you wanna see whatever common people see. Common People was one of my favorite songs on my last South special, and lo and behold, the album it comes from is just as good. Well, maybe not as good. Common People stands out as the highlight, but it's 12 strong tracks of a variety of Britpop flavors, and even some spookier undertones in a few songs that I didn't expect. Cataloging the mundane, the everyday life of the common man. There's a seething undercurrent of rage towards the higher class that boils throughout the first half that's mostly gone in the second half as they get lost in the throes of love or get drugged up at a rave, but the entirety of the album paints such a vivid picture of the state of the country in the mid-90s that still feels painfully relevant almost 30 years after the fact, and they absolutely have the tunes to back it up, too. Special shoutouts to I Spy, Disco 2000, and Feeling Called Love, but there's not a weak track here. And while the sound is very of its time, the tunes and sentiments are timeless enough that it can still resonate even to this day. It's just really cool. Called in sick from your funeral. Of all the new finds in that ranking, this was the one most up my alley, and shock of all shocks, the album as a whole delivers on that promise. I feel like every flavor of emo is touched upon here to some extent. The rip-roaring rockers, the slower plotting tunes, the theatrics and bombast. Really all that's missing is a quiet ballad, but I think the album's kinetic and dynamic enough that an absence of one doesn't really feel like a hole is being left unfilled. And lyrically, well, it's a lot, seeming to deal with one or maybe several friends Holden used to know but grew apart from for one reason or another. More than a few times directly tied to self-harm and suicide, but also just entangling a lot of emotional and physical abuse, grappling with queer identities, even a stab at the prevalence of police culture in America, all delivered through passionate vocals, killer hooks, and just all-around good music. It maybe sometimes gets a bit too abstract for its own good, and it runs a tad short, but no moment feels wasted, and it's a lot, but in the best possible ways. Man.
You're just stuck in the box that was made for me.
This one's somewhere between pretty good and fascinating for me because I'm still not quite sure what to make of it. I'd call it a pop album first and foremost, but there's a lot of rock in there too, and even some industrial rap elements on Abomination, which coincidentally is one of the album's highlights. Actually, the strongest stretch of the album is its opening 3 tracks, which is unusual for these grab bag listens where I come in only knowing one song, but yeah, it kicks off with a bang, then kinda mellows out. Shamir spends the time exploring her own past, including queerness, anti-capitalism, generational trauma, love and marriage, amongst other things probably. There's a few spots where the actual meaning is a bit muddied and the whole of it feels more like an album she made for herself rather than something designed to invite the audience in. But the tunes are pretty good and damn can Shamir sing. Something that also didn't quite come across in the one song I did know. I'm still not like over the moon for it, but it's intriguing and I'll definitely at least be coming back for more. And that'll do it for now. A lot of cool stuff happening, and 2023 is off to maybe a bit of a slow start album-wise, but the highlights are pretty dang high, and I'm eager to see what else happens in the coming months. Till then, Crow signing off.